Thank you for being here. This is the Utah Title I Directors Meeting for November 19th, and the snow was going here in Salt Lake City. It's kind of tapered off, but I always want it to snow more. My name is Max Lang. I work in a section here at USBE called Student Services, and our team is ESCA and related state initiatives. One of the many funding sources that we work with is Title I Part A. Very happy to have you here today. If I could have the USBE staff just come off camera and give us a wave so you can put a face to a name. Thanks. We're really privileged today to have our friends from special ed be here to present some valuable resources and information. I'll just get started with a context here of what we do with Title I, why we're here talking about this specifically today, and then I'll walk through the agenda a bit, and then we will get started. Again, just a couple housekeeping items. If you noticed in the agenda, I didn't schedule a break time for this meeting. So if you need to take a break, this meeting is recorded and the materials will be shared with you, including that recording. And that was a hint, Becky.
I do have it started.
Okay, excellent. Just walk through the agenda briefly today. I just want to set the context right here initially about what Title I is, what it isn't, and where it plays into the relationship of our work on a day-to-day basis to improve the growth and achievement of our students to benefit the schools and the communities. Then I'll turn the time over, and we're happy to have Neil Stevens with us, who is from our special education. He's the fiscal monitoring lead for special education. We'll talk about time and effort. This is an item that comes up every time we monitor, and special ed has been leading that work and providing a really good example and an exemplar. And so we'll allow that time for Neil. I know he has a very busy schedule, so we put him right at the top of the list. And then I'll turn the time over to Lindsay. If 2 summers ago, 2023, you had the opportunity to participate in the Meaningful Inclusion of Students with Disabilities Conference, then you really were treated with some valuable resources and how those things benefit school communities and cultures and benefit all students. We've kind of really got a special opportunity to have them here to talk with us specifically for our Title I directors. So we're happy to have Lindsay here. You may remember last spring, Tracy Gooley presented on the 1% alternate assessment participation and where we're getting in relationship to Title I and how it may impact Title I. She'll be here to share that. Merrill Lee and I will walk through something. Some of you may have gotten a letter from Merrill Lee and Clint regarding maintenance of effort. So we have some updates regarding MOE we'll talk about. And then lastly, we have the Align for Success rubric. And this is something that's near and dear to my heart because it's pretty much what I wrote my dissertation about, the alignment of after-school programs with regular day. And this is a valuable resource. So on that note, we will get started here. I just want to set this context. Title I falls under the Every Student Succeeds Act, which Congress passed in 2015, and this year funded $18 billion. Title I Part A the title of it is Improving the Academic Achievement of the Disadvantaged. That purpose, and Congress set aside specific barriers that they wanted this funding in a formula allocation to go out to states and areas that experience economic disadvantage. That is the barrier that Congress identified to help overcome with these funds. and the purpose is listed there. Utah this year, our portion was 80.5 million. And here are the goals that were listed specifically for Utah that align with the Utah State Board of Education goals and the strategies moving towards achieving those goals. The purpose of any program or resource like Title I, it's a funding source used in a school, is to improve the educational experience of the students, increase their academic growth and achievement. Title I Part A isn't a program. It shouldn't be what leads those programs. It's another resource to achieve those. It's a part of a continuous process. It's a resource that LEAs use, schools use for continuous improvement towards growth and achievement of their students. Understanding, setting the direction. Where do we want to be? What does our school want to look like? Where does our LEA want to be moving forward? Assessing needs of students. What specifically, where are students low? Where are they high and why? What are those things that we really need to address? And then creating a plan with evidence-based strategies to address those specific needs, to continue those things that are going well, and to address those things that need to be addressed in order for growth and achievement. Implementing that plan with fidelity. Monitoring, continuing to collect data to see how you're progressing towards benchmarks and goals, and then where needs or new needs come up, adjusting course and addressing them, and then starting over. Again, Title I is a supplemental resource. It's additional funding to help you in your regular day with everything that goes on in that school. Title I is there to supplement those activities. And with that, I am going to stop sharing. And Neil, I will allow you, I think Becky has set it up so you can share, and I'll turn the time over to Neil Stevens. He works here with us at USBE. He can introduce himself, but I've worked with Neil quite a bit, especially with the COVID relief funds. It was just $1 billion, and we relied heavily on Neil to steer us towards where we were supposed to be with those and doing them in compliance with the law. Thanks for being here, Neil.
Thank you. Quick audio test. Is my voice clear enough for everybody here?
Sounds
Great.
good to me, Neil.
All right. I'm here in the office today, which is a rarity for me, and using someone else's setup, so I want to make sure it works fine. As long as it's going well. So I'm Neil Stevens. I am the fiscal monitor down here in special education, and actually we're housed in financial operations. A couple years ago, we did a reorganization where we brought all our fiscal monitors from all our teams into one single team. So Marilee and Clint, they work also on a team here in financial operations for fiscal monitoring. I'm the team lead for that team. Cole Shakespeare is the team manager for that team. And we work closely together to hopefully align our monitoring activities, both in principle and practice, with each other. So the LEAs have a common experience across all programs when we are monitoring. I've been here at the USB about 6 years. And because I work in special ed, I've become somewhat of a federal compliance specialist for federal programs. In this case, time and effort. So we're going to go through some slides about time and effort here, answer any questions that may pop up. The slides are a little bit longer. I'm not sure I'll fit them all here in our allotted time, but my information is here. If you have questions, you can contact me and I'll work with you to resolve any concerns you may have. Of note, the same presentation has been provided to the business administrators statewide in early October, and also the special ed directors statewide earlier this month as well. So let's talk about time and effort in the news. What are some things that have happened in the past with time and effort? So Harvard University, they overstated their time worked on a particular grant by $2.4 million. They repaid that to the Federal Department of Education. Johns Hopkins University repaid $2.4 million to the National Institutes of Health, otherwise known as NIH, for not accounting for the proper amount of time spent on the grants. And Johns Hopkins stated that they not only overstated the time that they worked in, meaning they knew that their records weren't accurate, but they submitted them anyways. Also, Northwestern University, also the National Institutes of Health, had the same repayment. So time and effort is not only a education issue, it's a federal grants issue across all federal programs. Boeing, when they manufacture an airplane and they charge money to a federal grant, they have to keep time and effort for their employees to ensure that the persons being charged the grant are actually performing allowable work or cost for the grant. So what is time and effort? Required is a condition of receiving federal funds. So any LEA in the state who receives federal dollars of any sort is required to perform time and effort compliance work for that grant. As I stated earlier, it demonstrates that salaries and benefits are being used for the work performed on that program. We have a thing called allowable costs. Not all activities are allowable for all programs. Special education services are not allowable for a CTE program, and vice versa. Same thing with Title I services aren't allowable in special education. So this is a way to ensure that the wages being charged to a particular grant are allowable for that grant. And this is also in our federal regulations. So in 2 CFR 430, it talks about the elements of time and effort and what must be collected. So some recent findings that USB has issued. The biggest finding is that LEAs do not have a time and effort policy. So in the Uniform Grant Guidance, there's a section that says that time and effort must be implemented consistent with the internal controls of an LEA. Internal controls means policies and procedures that are written. Furthermore, USB has a board rule that states that all required elements of federal programs must have a policy procedure that is board approved by the LEA's board and be posted to the LEA's website. So that means when Mary Lee comes into Monitor or Clint and asks for a time and effort policy, that policy needs to be in writing, it needs to be board approved, and it needs to be publicly available on the website. If any of those three items are not present, the USB will issue a finding of noncompliance for not having those items there. Now, a finding noncompliance for policy procedure is one that is resolved fairly easily. Write a policy procedure, present it to your board approves it, put it on the website, and that finding noncompliance is removed. That's probably our biggest area of concern. Next area of concern are the forms are not being collected. So you have a time effort policy, but the staff members don't know what the policy is, don't know who's assigned to it, and you're not collecting forms. So when Mary Lee or Clint comes in, says, show us your time effort forms for this time period, and the LEA can't produce anything, all of a sudden, all of your Title I costs become unallowable costs because you don't have documentation of those wages and how the person spent the time. Now, we can remedy or rectify that with other types of records, but that becomes a very arduous task. Recently, an LEA had initial finding noncompliance for $15 million because they had over 1,500 employees for which they did not have time and effort forms for. The LEA then spent over 200 hours collectively between many staff members collecting alternate form documentation, Medicaid billing records. They were looking at HR records. They were looking at stipend records. All these things they had to go collect, spending many hours to satisfy the requirement to demonstrate the persons being charged the grant were actually working in the grant. Well, just I guess a forewarning that to make sure you're collecting those records, the time effort forms, the easiest way to collect that. And absent that other forms, but it becomes very time sensitive and time enduring to be able to document all those other activities. Another thing we see is the forms aren't being signed properly. A lot of times we'll see a form being signed months or weeks before our visit for years that occurred in the past. One LEA, we visited them in early 2024. They signed their forms in March 24 for school year 21. 30 years in the past after the work occurred, they're signing the forms. Not allowable. So again, this LEA is going to have to go through all their HR records and payroll records and program records to find ultimate documentation that demonstrates these people are working in special education. I acknowledge that the Title I grant is much smaller and the impact is always going to be much smaller. However, the theory still applies that if you don't have documentation, you're going to have to spend time to get ultimate documentation. Otherwise, the cost will become unallowable. We already talked about no policy procedures, talked about procedure not being assigned to an individual employee. So there needs to be a process in the LEA that the employee or employees who are responsible for collecting time and effort, it's in the procedure, so LEAs know who's supposed to do it. Oftentimes, especially in small charters, we see the BA assumes that the charter director or the charter a program manager will collect the time and efforts, and the program managers or charter director is also assuming that the BA is going to collect those things. And so what we have is we have fingers pointing opposite directions and no one's doing anything. And so when we comes to a monitoring visit, all of a sudden they're scrambling because no one collected time and effort and no one knew whose responsibility it was. So please, in your procedures, identify who's going to collect the time and effort, when it's going to be collected, how it's going to be collected, and what is the process for collecting those. Is it going to go out, if you have multiple locations, is it going to go out to your individual school administrators at that location? Is it going to be responsibility of the program director? Who should that responsibility lie on? When should they do it? How often should they do it? And how should they do it? That specificity is needed for when we have staff turnover in your LEAs, that a new staff member can look at that procedure and know what to do. And rather than it not being done at all because they don't have sufficient information of what the responsibilities are. So please review your policy procedures and make sure it's succinct enough and detailed enough to allow anybody to read it and understand what their responsibilities are. Do we have any questions in the chat or elsewhere right now?
I'm in the chat, Neil.
Okay. If you have any questions on come off mute, you can raise your hand or whatever, we'll address them. So let's talk about which programs need time and effort. So it's all federal programs. So we have Child Nutrition Program, CNP. We have any of the ESSA programs, Title 1 through 7. Includes the after school 21st century programs, any of those federal programs that you pay with those dollars to an individual. 100% of their time must be documented in their time and effort form. IDA programs, which is special education, state special education programs, and CTE are all programs that require time and effort to be collected for wages paid. So it's not just a Title I program or a special ed program. Those are the biggest programs that we administer. Is all these programs require it. So rules of the game. Anciently, I say anciently, 2014. So that's 10 years ago, a decade ago. They had different rules, and they were very detailed. So A87 was for school districts. A122 and A21 was for nonprofit organizations such as a charter school. And essentially said the same thing, that you collect the time and effort on a certain interval. So if you're paid with only one single funding source, you did it twice a year. If you're paid with multiple funding sources, you did it every month. And I had a list of what was required in documentation and so on and so forth. However, the new rules and Uniform Grant Guidance that came out in December 2014 did away with all of the detail and gave us wide latitude. It says LEAs or subrecipients rather, you go do your thing. You make sure that you have compliant policies and procedures to ensure that your collection of time and effort is adequate according to the rule. So it left a lot of room for interpretation. And I feel like because of that room for interpretation, a lot of LEAs and a lot of other subrecipients and other programs have taken advantage of that and loosened up their rules or not done anything at all. And so the rules aren't meant to reduce your responsibility. The rules are meant to give you flexibility in how you collect it. An example of that flexibility may be if you have an electronic timekeeping system. Maybe you're not signing your forms for your hourly paraprofessionals anymore. They're keeping track of their time in an hourly system where they clock in and clock out of a program responsibility. Say they work in Title I in the morning and they were doing Title 3 or 4 in the afternoon, and they're clocking out of those programs. You can see how much time they actually spent there. That's a form of an alternate time and effort system. We're not signing physical forms that with an attestation statement. That's allowable under the new guidance. So it allowed us more flexibility. So we just want to make sure that whatever our policies are, if they're still on A87 or A122, those are still compliant policies. But if you want to move to an electronic system or something more efficient, you can as well. Just make sure if you're doing other systems that aren't based in a attestation form, let USB know, and let's work with you with the LEA to make sure that it addresses all the areas of concern to ensure the compliance. Because the last thing we want to do is find non-compliance when we do visits. I mean, that's our responsibility, and we do find it, and we find it, we have to hold LEAs accountable. But that's not our goal. Our goal is just to ensure compliance with federal regulations, not issue findings or writing up an LEA for non-compliance. That's the last thing we want to do, because it causes more effort and work on our part to create a corrective action plan and to administer the action plan. And it creates a lot more effort on the LEA's part to do the same things. Our goal is when we do a visit is to be able to walk in, request documentation or e-documentation, find it compliant, and issue a letter say you're all good for the next couple of years. We'll see you in a few years for your next visit. That's the goal of USBE.
Bill, we do have a question in the chat, a pretty specific one. Just talked about some of the leniency in the new OMB or the Uniform Grant Guidance. Is it required in that documentation that there are multiple levels of signatures, or is just the supervisor signature or account that it's documented and it's correct?
So great question. I have a later slide that addresses this, but I'll address it right now. It does not address how many signatures are there, just with the person of direct knowledge of the other person's work. So meaning a program director or a school director could sign for them saying, I certified this person worked this percentage in this program during this time period. Someone's direct knowledge of that could be the employee or it could be a supervisor. It doesn't have to be both, one or the other, but there needs to be a signature. I had this question come up with a charter school network earlier, and I said, well, why do we have to have signatures? Because you can't attest to something without a signature. Affirmation of something is invalid if someone's not signing and putting their name to how they're certifying and why they're certifying it. So signatures are required. One is sufficient from either an employee or a direct supervisor. In your larger organizations, to most organizations, I wouldn't say that a business administrator can certify, because he or she is not in the school, does not know what those people are doing enough on a day-to-day basis to certify they're working the program. Their main role is the finances and documenting and reporting those finances. So anybody but the business administrator with direct knowledge of the person could certify for those that the time and effort work. And I hope that answers the question there.
Thank you.
All right, so requirements. So the first question is, who is required to do time and effort? Any employee that works in a federal program or state special education program is required to fill out a form. Third-party contractors, such as your OT, PT, your school psychs, those types of people providing third-party professional services, generally do not need to do time and effort. And there are only a handful of LEAs out there that have their own management companies that are solely for the LEA. Those, even though they're technically under IRS rules considered to be a contractor because they're not an employee of the LEA, they still need to do a time and effort because the management company only works for the LEA and doesn't provide employees elsewhere outside of the LEA's operations. So in general, all of your hourly staff, all of your teachers need to do a time and effort. If you have a specific question about a certain scenario with a third-party contractor, let Marilee, myself, or Clint know. We can talk through about what may be the appropriate action. But in general, every employee, teachers, paraprofessionals, etc., need to have a time and effort signed by for that LEA. Next part is, does it matter if they're paid with partial or complete time 100% federal funds? No, it does not, but you need to document 100% of the person's effort. So if that person is working in Title I partially, maybe an after-school program or a band program, 100% of the person's compensation is reported in that form and documented by a percentage of time worked in those areas. This includes stipends, includes off-contract work, it includes in-service days, professional time, anything that you compensate an employee with is considered to be reportable for time and effort purposes. We don't usually have matching grants here in education, so we don't have to worry about matching, but sometimes we have persons who receive federal dollars and state dollars for maintenance effort purposes. that money for maintenance and effort purposes is also required to be reported. Pause here for any questions about this. And if there are any, you can put in the chat, or we can talk offline as well. So kind of we talked about this, but the basic requirement is 100% of the person's time is reported. Not a 40-hour work week or a part-time work week if they're under 29 hours. It's 100% of the time they give you. No matter how you structure it, 100% of the time needs to be reported that time effort form. Let's talk about documentation. So we talked about internal controls. Internal controls are those controls, written procedures, policies that govern how you'll do this, how you'll be complying with this requirement. Have to be a part of official records. Time and effort should be readily accessible for anybody who has responsibility for these types of records within your LEA. They're subject to document retention requirements under federal guidance. That's 5 years. You retain documents, financial and programmatic documents. We have to be reflected for all the activity of the employee. You need to comply with this accounting standard. So whatever is in your payroll records needs to coincide or match what's in your time and effort records. In practice, that means we look at a payroll register, and if a person's paid with 5 different funding sources, but your time and effort says they only worked in special education on Title I during that time period, that's going to be a flag. We're going to ask, well, why is the difference? So why is your time and effort form not agreeing with your payroll records? So your records need to agree with each other. And if they work in more than one program, you have to have a distribution methodology, whether it's a schedule or with a time clock or your hourly persons, some way that you can actually distribute time amongst programs, and it should be fairly accurate for the time provided. That's why my suggestion to LEAs is if for your salaried staff, your teachers and other professionals that are not paid on an hourly basis, that you have them working on one program only. It makes time and effort tracking much simpler. And then for your hourly employees, if you can institute electronic time clock and have them work in multiple programs, you can keep track of the time clock system fairly easily, and it reduces the record-keeping burden on the LEA. So internal controls, they're there for reliability and accuracy. They're required by board rule, USB board rule, and required by federal compliance statutes. And ensures verifiable documentation, because we have a process of how we'll do things. We can easily verify that process, how it works, and the documents that support that process. Needs signatures always. We can do electronic signatures. Electronic timekeeping clocks, where an employee needs to sign in and out with a code, and then they certify their time as accurate when they submit it. That satisfies the signature requirement. You can create an Adobe form with electronic signature. That's perfectly allowable. You don't have to have a wet signature or have actually signed a piece of paper. We can make it more efficient with our modern technology resources. Documentation has to come with someone with firsthand knowledge. Employee, program director, or building administrator are sufficient. And backend documentation may be required if the other above items are not satisfied. So, for example, an LEA who signs time and effort forms 3 years after the work was performed, we're going to request a schedule, HR documents, employment contracts, meeting notes, caseloads, something to demonstrate that these people actually worked in this program. Excuse me.
Hey, Neil, just for clarification.
Sure.
So could a principal review that documentation with his assistant or her assistant and approve that, sign it as approved, and have that still be acceptable?
Yeah, the principal's reviewing it. He's saying, hey, we know this is accurate. Yes, he could do that. His signature should be on the form, not the admin assistant, though.
Thank you.
Kind of talked about this, all working time. any compensation employee has received needs to be on a time and effort form. Whether it's electronic time clock or actual form being signed, it needs to account for 100% of all compensation, including after school work. They do athletics, that they do some sort of arts, so they do band. All that work is accounted here. So we talked about these already, so we're gonna do this by establish internal controls, establish accounting policies, procedures. We're gonna do on a regular basis. The issues we want to be concerned with, if there's anomalies, if you're missing forms, if you're missing signatures, if you have people paid with federal dollars who aren't signing forms, those are all red flags to auditors and monitors such as ourselves here, Marilee, Clint, and I, and Val, that prompt us to look further into the situation. So we want to make sure that LEAs are regularly looking at their policy procedures or the forms that are being signed to do some internal spot checks or internal monitoring themselves to ensure they're compliant. It's much easier to correct an issue internally than it is to correct it when the external monitors or auditors are looking at this. And time and effort is also part of your annual audit if you receive a single audit. So your external auditors from your CPA firms will be looking at this as well. And those audits are actually uploaded to a federal clearinghouse. So the federal program manager will be notified of any programmatic issues found in your annual single audit. So this is just another reason why we need to ensure that we have compliance here beforehand to not create more areas of concern going forward with other entities when it comes to time and effort. Oftentimes in the time and effort guidance, it talks about a cost objective. Excuse me here. Cost objectives are large areas of work. So a teacher teaching special education is a cost objective. A paraprofessional in Title I is a cost objective. What is the main work they're doing? Not as what is the accounting code we're using. And so cost objectives are programmatic areas of work being performed. So we don't need to, if a teacher is paid to work in special education or Title I and also paid with state dollars to support that program, that's all the same program. It's not a state special education, federal special education. It's not at-risk dollars from the state and Title I dollars from the feds. It's just Title I work or at-risk work. That's important because the term cost objective is in the regulation. We want to make sure that we have a clear definition of what that means, and that's what it means. It means an area of work inside of a program.
Neil, just one more
yeah.
question.
Sure.
So on a couple of slides ago, there was something about stipends. You had
Yes.
mentioned as an option. A little more clarification.
So stipends are like if you have a off contract or beginning of year in service and you pay them $25 or however amount of money you pay them to come to a in service or a training that's off contract, that's considered to be a stipend. Stipend usually is a flat fee paid for a service that you're going to do or for attendance at an event. Stipend can also be in other areas, in other employment areas, be a mileage stipend. Or when I travel in state and I have to go from Salt Lake to San Juan, I get a daily stipend for my meals for that. It's any payment for a fixed amount of work that you're providing to the employee that may not be in the normal course of duties. Oftentimes we send staff to do professional development by a trainer, and we give them a flat fee for that. That's considered to be a stipend.
Does that have to be documented in the time and effort documentation?
Yeah, it has to be in the total hours worked. You may not, and depending how it's paid. If it's paid with a federal or state source for that program, you don't have to split it out. But say you use regulated dollars to pay for a stipend, you would need to break that out in your record somewhere. Not identify as a stipend, but ensure that the percentages on the time for form incorporate the stipends as well.
Thank you.
Kind of talked about this, but periodic reconciliation is a must, meaning LEAs need to reconcile their accounting records with time and effort records. They need to reconcile their policy procedures with what happens in practice. You say you can do time and effort twice a year, make sure you're collecting records twice over a year. Set a calendar reminder or checkup somewhere to ensure those records are collected and for everybody who is paid with those funding sources. Way too often we see people pay with dollars that were not signing time and effort forms, and we need to then find out why and do a checkup on that. It's easier for the LEA to do that internally than for it to happen at a monitoring visit. One very important area here is you cannot use the budget estimates for time and effort. So if you're going to budget $100,000 in Title I dollars for a school, you need to make sure that each individual employee is actual work time to report on time and effort, not just a round rough estimate of how much money you budget to spend there. That's been an area of concern at the federal level for quite some time, is using budget estimates rather than actuals. So please don't use budget estimates, use actual time worked on your time and effort forms. If we talked about this earlier, if you have persons in your LEA working with one program, make sure you have a system to allocate those funds across programs that's accurate with the time and effort worked. Going back to my earlier comment, it's easier if you put your hourly staff in multiple programs if you need to, and keep your salaried staff for your professional staff in one single program. Makes keeping track of time much simpler and reduces your administration burden. Also, let's make sure that training is done. Your teachers need to be trained on how often you need to do this, what their responsibilities are. Your administrators need to be trained on that, and also your business people in your business office need to be trained on their responsibilities. If you can do that annually, it'll ensure nearly 100% compliance with this particular requirement, rather than just assuming people know what they're supposed to be doing. So do trainings regularly, provide policy procedures, forms, answer questions, follow up with your staff members on their responsibilities on a regular basis. So what are our outcomes? Well, if you have 100% time and compliance, it's easy. We don't have any other questions for you. We don't have to issue any findings, corrective action, or corrective action follow-up. But if you're not compliant, you don't have policies in place, you're not collecting forms, then we have findings. We have repayment of unallowable costs. And we have sometimes put additional documentation requirements, additional corrective action follow-up requirements for longer periods of time to ensure compliance. So please, let's try and fall in the left-hand category of compliance, having policy procedures in place, having forms collected, so we're not having to do the work on the right-hand side of the column, which is more for everybody involved. I'm not going through these here. I have a bunch of different forms. I have some guidance from USBE that we have on our website. We have policy procedure examples, but I want to be respectful of the schedule here. So if we have any final questions, I can take those now. If not, we can take questions offline. You can email me and call me. We can talk about it. Any questions, concerns you may have.
There are no further questions in the chat. Does anybody have questions they want to come off mute and ask Neil while we have him? Thank you, Neil. Really appreciate your time. He had a pretty tight schedule today, so we were lucky to get Neil with us this morning. I realize that, we started out talking about how Title I is a supplemental, it's a supplemental resource to what's existent in the school. However, as we all know, and we've been working with for some time, there are always details and there are always requirements associated with those funds. And time and effort is one that comes up in every monitoring visit. Clint and Marilee ask every time we come to visit or every time we have a virtual meeting regarding this. So Neil, thank you for your time and thank you for the information. Again, this meeting is recorded and I will reach out to Neil to get those materials also to share with you. Thanks, Neil.
Thank you. Have a good day.
So I'm really happy. I can see Lindsay there. She's always smiling. Lindsay Cunningham, who is the instructional support for inclusive practices coordinator in special education. And I said at the top of the meeting that a couple of summers ago, there was a meaningful inclusion of students with disabilities conference. It was held in multiple sites, multiple different times. If you had that opportunity to go there to that conference, you really received a wealth of information. We're happy to have Lindsay here because now that same group is focusing more on smaller groups to share the information. And we're happy to have Lindsay here today. There was some coercion involved, so thank you, Lindsay. I'll turn the time over to you.
Thanks, Max. Good morning. Like Max said, my name is Lindsay Cunningham. I am the instructional support for inclusive practices coordinator here in the special ed section, and I am so excited to be with you all this morning. So I am just going to share my screen and see if it all comes the way it's supposed to. And Max, are we good? Can you see that? Yeah.
Yeah, it's not in presentation mode. I made that mistake earlier this morning. If you want, we can't see your follow-up slides.
Awesome. Let's see. Present from the beginning. There we go. That work?
Perfect.
Perfect. All right. So today I just want to talk to you guys about meaningful inclusion for students with disabilities and what that can look like in your LEA and in your schools. So today we're going to talk about the definition of inclusion for students with disabilities. We are going to identify some current myths and what the actual facts are with that. We're going to talk about specially designed instruction and what it is and what it's not, because specially designed instruction really is the key to providing services for students with disabilities. And we want to ensure that everyone understands specially designed instruction so that the options for inclusive practices is there. We'll look at how you can implement some different inclusive practices within your schools, the self-measurement tool that we have created and provided within the within the implementation guide. And then lastly, we're going to quickly discuss just how inclusive practices can really benefit student outcomes for students with disabilities and how it can help with their life outside of and post high goals. So that's kind of where we're headed today. So I'm going to see if someone wants to come off mute and read this quote for me. I know someone does.
I'll do it for you, Lindsay.
Thanks, Val.
Why inclusion for students with disabilities? Disability is a natural part of the human experience and in no way diminishes the right of individuals to participate in or contribute to society. Improving educational results for children with disabilities is an essential element of our national policy of ensuring equality of opportunity, full participation, independent living, and economic self-sufficiency for individuals with disabilities.
Thank you so much. And that quote comes directly from the Individuals with Disability Education Act. And so it states right there just how important it is for students with disabilities to really get to experience education and be a part of our community just as much as any other student. So back in 2021, the Utah Special Education Advisory Panel tasked the board well, they put in a memo and said, you know, we really need to focus on inclusion for students with disabilities. And the board tasked Leah Voorhees with taking that and really, they tasked us with creating the portrait of meaningful inclusion and working on inclusive practices for students with disabilities within our work. So the very first thing we had to do was come up with a definition of what is inclusion for students with disabilities. And one of the things I just feel like I need to say is I know that the new law came out this last legislative session, and I believe it's HB 261 about diversity, equity, and inclusion not being able to be said. And I get the question often, like, Linz, why do you get to say inclusion, right? Like, this is one of those words that has not, it's kind of been banned. And the one thing that I always come back with is one, we say it's inclusion for students with disabilities. And so it's protected within that context. And we are not saying it in the context of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it's not in those same three words, and the law does require it to be diversity, equity, and inclusion. So I just want to make it clear that it's okay to say inclusion for students with disabilities, and we are safe to move forward in the work of inclusive practices and inclusion for students with disabilities as we're moving forward. So in 2021, we worked with a group of community partners and stakeholders to come up with a definition of meaningful inclusion for students with disabilities. And that's what you're seeing on the screen. So the definition reads, it is to ensure students that each is valued as visible members of the school community with equal opportunities to contribute by creating conditions for active, meaningful participation with interaction and engagement with age-appropriate peers, systems that promote high expectations and learner agency for each student, grade age-appropriate core content standards, curricular materials and resources, and the availability of customized supports, including individualized education program, so your IEP, team determined services across all educational settings, including extracurricular activities, to the maximum extent appropriate in the least restrictive environment. And that went into our special education rules and was approved by the school board in January of 2023. So that's where you can now find that definition. Inclusion for students with disabilities is not actually defined in the IDEA law, but like least restrictive environment is and some other things are, but inclusion is not. So that's a difference for you guys to know. So then we created the portrait of meaningful inclusion. And this is where we took the definition and went to the next step. So if you have your phone or you have your computer, there is a QR code or a bit.ly that you could use to go to the materials and the implementation guide that we created with this. So here is the key pieces of the portrait of meaningful inclusion. We call it POMI, and it was broken down into 4 conditions. And if you remember our definition, the ABCD that was bolded, it is now broken into these 4 conditions. So we have our peers, and that's that each student has an interaction and engagement with age-appropriate peers, and that they are valued as a visible member of their school community. When we're looking at systems, we want to make sure that all stakeholders work to develop a system promoting high expectations and learner agency, and that they're engaging in the process of creating opportunities that empower each student to use their voice and contribute to their individual learning experiences, like voice and choice, right? We want to make sure that our students get a say in what they're doing and have participation in what that looks like, just as much as their non-disabled peers. The next is access. So we want to ensure that each student will be taught using grade and age-appropriate content standards, their curricular materials and resources, and that they have equal opportunities to grade level instruction, and that it's provided with and that their materials and resources are also made accessible. One of the things that, we've seen when we are out monitoring or out on different site visits or out just in the communities and in the LEAs is sometimes we see our students with disabilities are receiving grade level content with students who are significantly younger than they are. So an example might be like we might see a 9th grade student receiving services with a 4th grade student, okay? Or things like that, not appropriate, right? We want to ensure that they're getting that equal access and grade level appropriate content. The last one is that supports and services. So we want our educators to provide individualized support needed to fully engage students with disabilities across all educational environments. And then students with IEPs are to receive specially designed instruction and customized supports across all settings, including their extracurricular activities to ensure equitable access and high achievement in their education. So let's discuss some myths and facts. These are some things that we have heard over the last couple of years that we just want to maybe clear up. So the first myth, inclusion of students with disabilities negatively affects students without disabilities and their teachers. That's not true. The actual fact is that research has shown that inclusive schools and classrooms benefit both students with disabilities and students without disabilities. The benefit depends on providing appropriate support and services in the classroom, along with properly trained personnel. So as long as we're providing the right supports, it actually is good for everybody involved. Research has yet to show that there is a negative impact in an inclusive setting. Not true. The next myth, students with disabilities need to be ready for inclusion. So often we hear that students with disabilities have to prove that they can be in a general ed classroom, or they have to work their way in, right? Not true. The fact is that all students have a right to be educated in general ed settings. Their readiness should not be a prerequisite for inclusion. It is a student's civil right to be educated with their peers in the least restrictive environment. It is their right to get to access that content as much as anyone else, as long as that least restrictive environment is there. So truly what we should be looking at is placing them in the least restrictive environment and then ensuring that the data supports that continuum of placement for where the student is. Not being like, oh, this kiddo has Down syndrome, so we're automatically going to place them in a special classroom or in a special school. Okay. The next myth we hear is that inclusion of students with disabilities requires resources and personnel schools do not have. It's just too expensive. Fact, Studies show that that inclusive schools is not more expensive than educating students with disabilities in special ed classrooms. Further, the least restrictive environment, the LRE, provisions of the Individuals with Disability Act indicates that cost cannot be a factor in deciding placement. Providing flexible services in the general ed setting is not necessarily more expensive. It can actually help schools maximize resources to meet the needs of all students. So we're going to talk about some inclusive practices that actually will benefit all students in those settings. And if you can help work with your teams and think outside of those boxes, how specially designed instruction can be provided and really help provide services to students with disabilities. Sorry. And ensure that we are looking at how to provide resources to ensure services are there. Last two, myth. Students with the most significant cognitive disabilities need specially designed instruction that is impossible to provide in the gen ed setting. Fact, students with the most significant cognitive disabilities benefit from inclusion in many ways. There is no requirement that they must keep up academically with everything in the gen ed class that the gen ed class is doing. Students should have the opportunity to learn far more than just the functional academics. So when we are thinking about that, we are also thinking about the social skills, the arts, the sciences, the health, all of those extra things that are so beneficial. And then the last one says students with the most significant cognitive disabilities have too many challenges to benefit from inclusion in the general ed classroom. The fact, supplementary aids, services, and appropriate staff development can address challenging behaviors. A universal design for learning, so UDL, can make instruction more accessible and engaging. So again, just the way we structure our classrooms and our schools can really help ensure that our students with disabilities can be an active part of the different classrooms in those different settings within our schools. Okay. So how is inclusion achieved? Well, in the Meaningful Inclusion Implementation Guide, which was part of that QR code, on page 14, there's kind of a list, and here's some of those. So one, we want to design a culture within our schools that supports inclusion for students with disabilities. We want to make sure that our culture is welcome to all. We want to intentionally plan educational experience and embed high quality instruction and expectations for students with disabilities. So we want to set those expectations high, and we want our students with disabilities to meet those expectations, right? Several years a study, a questionnaire, where she asked parents, students with disabilities, general education teachers, special education teachers, who thinks that students with disabilities can be successful and meet high outcomes. And the number one group who thought, yes, we can meet high expectations and we can be successful was who? Put it in the chat. Who thought they could do it? Who thought they could be successful and meet high expectations? Put it in the chat. We had gen ed teachers, special ed teachers, parents, and students with disabilities. Okay, I see regular ed teachers, a couple more answer. I hope leadership groups, students. Okay, Erin, you're right. the number one group who thought that they could do it were students with disabilities. They said, yes, yes, I can. I can be successful and meet high achievements. Okay, my next question. What group thought they really can't meet those high expectations? Put it in the chat, gen ed teachers. I hope not school leaders. Couple more drop in the chat. Parents. Okay. The number one group who thought they couldn't meet the expectations was actually the special ed teachers. Ugh. Knife dagger to the special ed teacher's heart, right? So our students with disabilities thought, yes, I can do it. And our special ed teachers thought, no, you can't. Okay. So what does that tell us? We need to hire our expectations of students because they can do it, right? So we need to help ensure that we are setting high expectations for our kids and bring them to that challenge, right? And then create opportunities where they get to show us, yes, I can. Okay. Then we need to appropriately allocate the funding, resources, and staffing to do that. We need to strategically design our scheduling. So when we're thinking about our master calendars, we got to think that through. What does that look like in both elementary and secondary settings? Okay. We need to consistently implement specially designed instruction, accommodation, and supports. We need to establish communication and feedback loops, not just with each other, but with our parents and with our students. And then we need to align school-wide initiatives that have those inclusive practices built in with them. Okay, so that's just a few ways that we can start to look at how we can achieve inclusion within our schools. So to be open to inclusion for students with disabilities, we need to understand specially designed instruction. And as I've now been doing this for close to four years, I think, which is so crazy, we have learned that there is a major misunderstanding of what specially designed instruction is in the state. And a lot of people don't know where it can be provided, who can provide it. And it started even within our agency and expanded out. So we've been really working on that. So most of our partners are trying to figure this out. And so we have been working and we've created a document that shows what SDI is. We are updating our specially designed instruction handbook. So hopefully that will be out in the next few months. And I'll make sure Max lets you guys know when that's updated. And I have linked in another Padlet that SDI document for you. So what is specially designed instruction? Specially designed instruction means that we are adapting as appropriate the content, the methodology, or the delivery of instruction to address the unique needs of a child that result from the child's disability and to ensure access of the child to the general curriculum so that the child can meet the educational standards within the jurisdiction of the public agency that apply to all children. And that comes out of the Code of Federal Regulations, which is also in our special education rules, okay? So when we are thinking about how do we adapt things as appropriate, when we are thinking of content, we're thinking of the what, okay? So that's our core standards, our learning objectives, and the individual student's goals. When we're thinking of the methodology, we're thinking of the how. Okay. So that's the process through which academic instruction, social instruction, and behavioral instruction and interventions are being developed. And then lastly, we're thinking of the delivery, which is our who, our where, and our when. So that's the repertoire of resources, supports, and technologies used to communicate and interact with students related to individualized academic and behavior content that support student learning and engagement. Okay. And oftentimes methodology and delivery are intertwined. Okay. So what is SDI and what is it not? SDI is a service in addition to core instruction, which means it is supplemental. So students with disabilities should be receiving their core instruction and specially designed instruction. Oftentimes what we see is our students with disabilities are being pulled out of core instruction to receive their specially designed instruction. Not what should be happening, right? It is not a replacement of core instruction. It is something that the teacher does based on teaching specific skills a student does not have to access and make progress in the general curriculum. It is not a commercial program, a place, or a schedule. So many times we see people put a student in front of a computer and say, okay, now we're going to do Alex. And that is going to be your specially designed instruction. No, friends, that is not specially designed instruction. Okay. So we need to make sure that it is something a teacher is doing to help our student. It involves unique instruction written into the IEP, provided to the student to progress towards their annual IEP goals. It is not restating the academic content standards being taught, not an overview, okay? Again, it is very specific to the individual student. So it's what they're really lacking or what we've been changing the word to like what opportunity gaps there are that we're going to help fill in order for them to be successful. And then SCI is an instruction that allows a student to make progress in the general ed curriculum that's closing that gap in their academic performance as compared to his or her general education peers. It is not an excuse to set low expectations or teach below grade level. We are not making grade level content available or accessible to students with disabilities. So again, we need to ensure that our 9th grade students are receiving 9th grade curriculum and that we are adapting that content so that they can learn it. Okay. Any questions? All right. I'm off speaker at any time, guys.
None in the chat, Linz.
Okay. So who can deliver specially designed instruction? This is the other piece that like kind of blows people's minds sometimes. So a teacher with a special ed license can provide SDI. A gen ed teacher in collaboration with a special education teacher can provide specially designed instruction. So that's one of the ways that we're able to look at that inclusive practice, right? So if we have our students in that general ed setting and their general ed teacher has been working with their special ed teacher, that gen ed teacher is able to provide some of that service time for that kiddo to keep them in that classroom if that's their least restrictive environment. We also have our teachers who are duly certified in both gen ed and special ed and our related service providers. And then paraeducators who can assist in providing specially designed instruction to a student under the direct supervision of a special ed teacher and training by an appropriate licensed teacher or related service provider who's prepared the programming for that student. So that's the big piece with paraeducators, friends, is we need to make sure that our special ed teacher is preparing that programming, not just letting our paraeducators run free and do all the programming for them. Okay. All right. So why inclusive practices should be put into place? Inclusive practices aim to minimize or remove barriers to learning and support the social, academic, and physical success of all learners while ensuring that teaching standards are not compromised. So here are some inclusive practices that you could start to implement pretty quickly in your schools or LEAs. The first one is to build a school of belonging. How do you do that? Well, one, we ensure your vision and mission statement reflects the belonging of all students, including those with disabilities. We create classroom cultures where students are valued, they feel seen, and they're encouraged to use their voice, allowing them to foster relationships between students with and without disabilities, and allow for those relationships that are genuine and pure to develop and form. And it really is so special when you get to walk into schools and classrooms where those opportunities exist and are developed and formed in a natural way instead of kind of like, you have to do this. Like, Val, you are partnered with Lindsay and you have to be her friend, right? We provide like structures and units. Nope, I don't blame you, Val. I wouldn't want to be my friend either. They're like put in these spots where everyone's given opportunities to be buddies with people. Okay, I see a question. Let me see what it says. Are these slides available to share with my SPED department? I can share them with you to share with your SPED department. I'll email them to Max. Does that work? Awesome. Okay. So then we want to ensure that our staff and educators use inclusive language of students with disabilities and encourage to invite families into conversations on preferred terminology. So one of the big conversations we've been having within our agency is student first language, right? We do not say, I always have to stop and think how I'm going to say it, a Down syndrome child, right? We say a child with Down syndrome or a student with Down syndrome. We do not say a blind person. Okay, I have to like think. However, there are some categories, some people who prefer to be their the way it's said. So someone is deaf, right? So they are a deaf person because that is who they are. A lot of the deaf culture is their preference is to be termed that way, right? Same with the autistic community, right? And that's one that can kind of go back and forth. So some people with autism prefer to say, I'm a person with autism. Other people with autism prefer to say, I'm autistic. And so my point to that is ask, right? I do a book study with parents every spring, and we read books on students with disabilities, and some of the terminology that catches people, I'm always like, oh, I had no idea, right? I read a book like My Brother is a Superhero, and some parents really did not like the term superhero being used to describe a disability. Other people really loved it, right? So include the families and find out how they like to be involved in those conversations. When I hear people say an IEP student, yes, cringe, right? I hope that's something no one should be saying an IEP student, right? I mean, that's just bad. That is just bad juju. And so we always want to make sure that we are identifying our students as people first. The other one that Lindsay, am trying to start to make a different, yes, same goes as Title I students. Yes, amen, Val. The other one I'm trying to kind of move away from is general ed students, right? Like our gen ed students. Well, students with disabilities are also gen ed students, right? They are gen ed students first. So what I'm trying to say is our students with or without disabilities, because all students are general education students. So there's my challenge for all of you as we move forward, to not just classify our gen ed students as just our non-disabled peers, because all students are gen ed students. Soapbox 101. Okay, off that. And then our last one is to provide opportunities for students with disabilities to participate in discussions, assignments, and tasks by having accessible resources and materials, using assistive technology, etc. One of the big things we've really been working on within our agency, our department, our section, is really ensuring our work is 508 accessible. I have become the biggest critic in conferences and in anything I go to if PowerPoints are not 508 accessible, right? If people are not using microphones, I am super critical. Do they have their text to speech going, right? How are we making things more inclusive for everybody, right? These are all things that we can be doing right away that makes our work more inclusive for everyone, and it's best practice, right? So things to be thinking about. So another one, universal design for learning, right? It's an educational framework that guides the development of flexible lessons and systems that encourage variability, they minimize barriers, and they develop agency for all. So these two pictures show, the first one, there's one path for how to learn something. With universal design for learning, there are 3 different ways for a student to show that they have competency and understanding of the lesson, and they get to choose what that looks like, right? Are they reading a passage? Are they watching a video? Or are they looking at pictures? I don't know. But we're giving them opportunities to get the context, right? Then do they get to draw it, write it, or speak it? So are we thinking outside of the box on how our students are engaging in participating in this work? So when we're thinking about the UDL design process, we are setting clear, rigorous goals and asking ourselves, what is the goal? Okay. We're anticipating that variability, and we're asking, what are the barriers for our students? And then we're designing options to minimize those barriers. So those are the questions we're asking. How do we minimize that? So those are some things to think about. Here is the bit.ly for the Universal Design for Learning Guidelines. feel free to go look. This is done by CAST. I just wanted to share it as a resource for you guys to be able to access. The next one is using co-teaching as an inclusive practice. And there's multiple ways to think about co-teaching. Co-teaching is the instructional arrangement in which a gen ed teacher and a special ed teacher deliver core instruction and specialized instruction as needed to a diverse group of students in a single physical space. Co-teaching partnerships require educators to make joint instructional decisions and share responsibility and accountability for student learning. So, what is it and what is it not? Co-teaching is joint responsibility for planning, instruction delivery, and classroom management. It's a component of a continuum of services for students with disabilities. It's carefully matched professionals to ensure success for all students. It really is so important to make sure that we are putting the right professionals together when we're looking at this. We need to make sure that both professionals are present in class every single day. It doesn't mean that we have our gen ed teacher showing up and our special ed teacher hitting and missing, right? It is every day, both accountable, both engaging. Both professionals planning lessons to meet the needs of all learners, and then both professionals being responsible for all students. Again, the beauty of co-teaching is ensuring that that specially designed instruction is there, and that either one of those professionals are able to provide that SDI to a student with a disability. Co-teaching is not one teacher maintaining all planning and instruction. It is not having a smaller class in a large classroom. Oftentimes we see that co-teaching becomes like a class of 6 or 12, right? Or it becomes a class of 50% students with disabilities, 50% students without disabilities, also not co-teaching, okay? It is not two professionals providing instruction to a homogeneous group of students. It is not an extra set of hands in the classroom. It is not one paraprofessional and one professional instructing. And it is not a special education teacher working only with students with disabilities. Okay. So it really is a blend. Again, we are working on updating our co-teaching manual. And hopefully that will be done and ready for you guys to access here shortly. So here is another resource for you guys to access. This is a Padlet. It has tons of resources for you guys. It will have, actually, I kind of want to show you. Escape. Let me just pull it up real fast. Stop sharing. And then let me share with you this Padlet so that you can see all things. Okay. So this is our Meaningful Inclusion for Students with Disabilities Padlet, and it just has a bunch of resources. Here is that specially designed instruction infographic that I was talking about earlier. Here is the Meaningful Inclusion for Students with Disabilities Implementation Guide. You will see there is also just so many different resources from USBE, federal resources, extracurricular, resources for parents. In my next couple slides, I'm going to show you guys a measurement tool. And this actually is a tool that you guys can use for you and your school and take the measurement tool and determine how inclusive you are. So this, when you click on it, it lets you make a copy. And then you get to go in and score your measurement tool. And then there's one down here that does it for a group. So it combines all of the group scores together. So like if your general education teachers and your special education teachers and your principal and vice principal were all to take this, you would then be able to see how inclusive your school was and then have some group discussions together. So I wanted to share that with you because I'm not going to come back into this. And then over here, this last one is a link to another Padlet that is full of resources for inclusive practices that Sam Sego, one of our inclusion specialists, has created. So there's infographics and articles on how to create like a classroom of belonging, how to ensure that your recesses are inclusive, how to do field trips and extracurricular ideas. So this Padlet just links you to multiple other resources on how to create inclusive schools. So I just wanted to share that with you before we continued with the slides. So now we'll go back to sharing slides. Okay. So all right. So as I said, in the implementation guide, there is a self-measurement tool that you each can take and determine how inclusive your school is. Then you can score it, and it allows you to see like the group average, what the mean was, and what the high and low was. So if there's like
You didn't share
a
that.
high of 4, but then, oh, the slides aren't sharing.
No.
Sorry, thank you. Let me try again. Better. Thank you. Sorry, guys. Okay. So it allows you to just see if there's like maybe a one-off, right? Maybe 3 or 4 people thought everything was great, but someone didn't. It allows for those conversations to happen and kind of see where that disconnect is. So those measurement tools kind of allows for that scoring to automatically happen and then those conversations to exist. Okay. So lastly, inclusive practices improve student outcomes. So in 2004, with the new IDEA, it said almost 30 years of research and experience has demonstrated that the education of children with disabilities can be made more effective by having high expectations for such children and ensuring their access to the general ed curriculum in the regular classroom to the maximum extent possible. And that was 20 years ago. So we now have 50 years of research that's demonstrating that these high expectations increase student outcomes, right? And that we are giving opportunities for our students with disabilities. And so the other night, I'm sitting in front of my TV and I am watching the news. And this was literally on the 14th. And I saw this fun little news. And so, I thought, oh my gosh, this is perfect. And I want to share it with you guys. So now I just need to figure out how to make this work. So, oh no. Okay, let's
In
see.
our office, we always use Teams. Zoom is,
Let's see. Okay, hold on. Yeah, pause this.
Hey, Lynn's in your audio settings. You've got to make sure you click share computer audio.
Okay, hold on. Share. And get off these.
having flashbacks to the last board meeting when I couldn't get my stuff to share.
Mhm.
What makes the difference?
Disabled Americans in the workforce hit record highs last year. In tonight's Eye on America, CBS's Meg Oliver looks at a unique partnership between a hotel and a university that's giving people with intellectual disabilities a shot at independent living, as well as a paycheck.
In the heart of downtown Clemson, South Carolina, the Shepherd Hotel is a community hub, buzzing with locals and visitors.
Can you get fluffy buttermilk pancakes, please?
Like most hotels, the staff is what makes the difference. But here, it's the staff that makes it uniquely special.
Hey everybody, I'm Alex Evelyn.
Like many of the Shepherd's employees, Evelyn has a developmental disability. As a child, doctors thought he would never walk or talk.
Have you ever taken a day off?
No, I love it walking.
Would you ever even dream of taking a day off?
No.
According to a survey, about 16% of people with intellectual disabilities are employed. But here at the Shepherd Hotel, around 30% of the staff have intellectual disabilities and make far above federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour.
How are you?
A server in the restaurant, Evelyn is learning the ropes from Marcus.
Nice, quiet place.
While his buddy John mans the front desk with Marsden.
If we do our job right, someone leaves here inspired.
The hotel's co-founder, Rick Hayduck, brought his vision of employing intellectually disabled people to life. 2 of his 4 children have Down syndrome.
What happens when I'm the 80-year-old sitting in church with my, a 50-year-old Down syndrome kid? My wife and I were saying, how do we avoid that?
If you like waffles and you have a full box, and that should be one of your breakfasts.
The hotel partnered with a program at nearby Clemson University called Clemson Life. Students, including Hayduck's daughter Jameson, not only take college courses, they learn skills to help them live and work independently.
We got bottle brushes.
Starting from the moment of that alarm going off, to have time management.
Erica Walters is the program director.
Banking, budgeting. When it's grocery shopping, they are going through their inventory here, and then they're going to the grocery store.
97% of the graduates are employed. Plans are underway to open 2 more similar hotels in South Carolina next year.
We want to grow for the sake of inspiration and change.
Changing lives like Evelyn. He graduated from Clemson Life in May and is now working toward a hospitality certificate.
My dream is to open a restaurant one day.
Did you ever think you would live by yourself?
No, never. I'm so happy.
Do you miss living with your parents?
No way, no.
Sorry, Mom.
Thank you.
Today, Evelyn has a full schedule, going to class, managing the Clemson basketball team, pledging Delta Chi fraternity, and working.
Why are you so happy?
Because no time to have a bad day in life. Because I want to tell people could do anything in life. the falafel salads.
Evelyn is proof people with intellectual disabilities can do whatever they put their mind to when a shepherd shows the way.
Too easy, dude.
For Eye on America, Meg Oliver, Clemson, South Carolina.
Okay. I hope you could hear it. Could you hear it? Awesome. Okay. So, sorry. That is the power of high expectations and student outcomes, right? Our goal is that all of our students with disabilities have the same opportunities to go further into college, into a successful career, into independent living, just like we would hope for any non-disabled peer. And so that is what we're working towards. That is what we're hoping for. And that's why we want to make these shifts within our schools to help set our kiddos up for success. So with that, thank you so much for your time this morning. I really appreciate Max letting me join you. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to me. I'll make sure that I send Max my slides. My contact is just lindsay.cunningham@schools.utah.gov. And it is in my slides on the last slide. I'm just not going to take the time to repost that one slide. So thank you all so much. And I hope you have a really great day.
Lindsay, thank you so much for being here with us. I just have to share because a couple of years ago, through Lindsay's efforts, a group of us, including a couple of board members, state board members, got to visit Washington State to visit some schools who were really implementing meaningful inclusions for students with disabilities. And one of those schools, in fact, was built from the ground up specifically with that intent. I was just coming off of working in the Center for School Improvement here at the state. And as you know, there's a lot of accountability for Title I LEAs, Title I schools in targeted support and improvement for the student group, students with disabilities. So I was really honed in on how was it impacting quantifiable academic growth and achievement. And so I made it a point to pull the leaders, the school leadership, the LEA leadership aside to ask specifically about that. And in all the cases where I talked with those schools we visited, they said, not only are our students with disabilities improving quantifiably according to our state standards, but it's raising the ship in general. All students are achieving faster. And I can say that the culture in those schools and the activities that we saw were pretty amazing. Wanted just to point out one specific. I remember one of the things we were looking at was co-teaching. And in those cases where we saw that, you couldn't pick out who the special education teacher was. You couldn't pick out the students in the classroom. The culture was there that all students in the classroom were learning. So thank you, Lindsay, for putting that together. Our state board has embraced this and has tasked us to promote it and move it forward. These are valuable resources. And Lindsay is a valuable resource. So thank you, Lindsay. Appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Max.
Yeah, thank you. Next item on the agenda. Tracy was with us last spring talking about the 1% alternate assessment participation. And she was sharing with us how its relationship to Title I. There's a threshold there on how many students, the percentage of students can take that alternate assessment until we, I guess, exceed that threshold. And then there's a potential that it can impact Title I funding. So there are some updates. So Tracy was kind enough to come in and share with us where we are with regards to that. And I'll let Tracy introduce herself, but I'll turn the time over to you, Tracy. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Max. So I'm Tracy Gooley. I am one of the USBE Special Education Assessment Specialists, and this comes pretty perfectly right after Lindsay's inclusionary practice stuff and meaningful inclusion. So I oversee all of our alternate assessments for students with significant cognitive disabilities. With that puts me the lead on this new fantastic what they call 1% alternate assessment participation cap or threshold. Malia McLavena is our special education data specialist. She supports a lot of those endeavors. And then of course we have Leah Voorhees that is our assistant superintendent over student support. So this federal regulation really sits over her. So when they reauthorized ESSA in 2015, they changed a component in here related to alternate assessments for students with the most significant cognitive disabilities. It used to be that a state could not have more than 1% of our student population be proficient in alternate assessments. They found that across the nation, they were seeing very much an increase in the number of students across the states participating in alternate assessments. I have recently learned that there was an advocacy group that went to Congress around this. I'm guessing part of it has to do with probably some inclusionary practices that was part of that agenda. So one of the things that they made when they reauthorized ESSA was that a state is only allowed to have 1% of our student population participate in alternate assessments. So that made a really big difference in all the things that were going on. When that was also reauthorized, they put in many other components that require the state to have some oversight and start monitoring what is going on with our alternate assessment participants. With that, one of the things that is required is whenever an LEA has assessed over 1% of your student population on an alternate assessment, they're required to submit a justification letter back to USBE. And then there's multiple components within that. We are also required to have that oversight as determined by a state of an LEA that is required to submit that information to the state. One of the other things that sits within this regulation is that if a state were to anticipate that they would exceed that 1% cap, we are supposed to submit a waiver back to the Department of Education requesting to be waived from that cap. Within that waiver, we have to present a timeline and a plan and all the things that we are doing to oversee this and what are we doing to help bring that number down. And really monitor that. There's a couple other components that come into place with that waiver that we'll talk about here in just a sec. So we have been tracking this, our state data. So you can see, so that was reauthorized in, I believe it was 15, 16, 17 was kind of that first year that they put ESSA into place. And then it was that year they allowed states to look at data, figure out what was going on, and they implemented this regulation and really started monitoring it at the state level in that 17, 18 year. So you can see in 16, 17, when we started digging into this, we were over 1% as a state. The key to this is this does not sit on our enrollment. This truly sits, this calculation sits on our assessment participation. So of all of the students in Utah or all of the students in your LEA that participated in a statewide year-end assessment, how many of them participated in the alternate assessment? So we are just simply looking at students in grades 3 through 10. And that's for RISE, Utah Aspire Plus, and then DLM is our alternate assessment. So you can see that we, in that 16, 17, we actually, that was the first year that we started implementing justification letters, doing some monitoring, and you can see that we started bringing that number down. So in that 17, 18 year, when they first started identifying states at the federal level, we actually had dipped under the 1% mark. So we have a state that has not been identified yet, But we have had some measures in place, and I do believe that the work that we've done at the state and the work that your special education directors have done at the LEA level really did have an impact on us performing under that 1% mark. However, you can see that we're starting to increase. And in fact, last year or this year, when we took last year's assessment data and went to calculate where we were in our 1% component, we had to go out to the thousandth to see if we were over 1%. So the mark is at 1.01%. A state is considered to be over. One shift that we did make is last school year, we started reporting to the federal government our 9th grade student assessment data. In previous years, we had just provided them with zeros in that data. So we actually did the one an impact component that we looked at when we made that decision. And by adding 9th grade students into that data set, it didn't change our participation rates. So we now are in a space where we do provide them the grades 3 through 10 assessment data. So as we are coming closer into this, we have had to make a few different shifts. You can see the number of LEAs here that assessed over 2%, those that were between the 2% and 1%. And then we also took a look this year and have invited LEAs that assessed in that 0.85 to 0.99 to some of the activities that we've implemented statewide. So you can kind of see just overview there. So one of the other areas of concern that we have is if we anticipate going over 1%, we are supposed to be requesting a waiver and applying for that waiver for the Department of Education. However, one of the criteria within requesting a waiver is we have to meet at least 90% of all of our students statewide participating in our statewide assessments and 95% of our students with disabilities. You can see here that we don't even hit 90% of our students in grades 3 through 10, and then science starts in grade 4. We don't even hit 90% of our student population participating in statewide assessments. One of the other things that really impacts this is we have a parent opt-out component that sits at our state level. With that, when we report participation in state accountability measures, so things like our school report card and assessment reports that go back to the state legislature, they actually allow us at the state level to take our students that have parent opt-out and remove them from the denominator, so we don't even see them as students that we would expect to participate. So a lot of times when we're reporting that state level participation data out, it's inflated because we have the ability to remove those students. However, the federal government does not. So when we report participation back to the feds, it's always going to look different than what we do with our state accountability. So we're in a space where we don't even have the ability really to apply for a waiver. The federal government would say they would never suggest to not apply for a waiver, but they have said that they would not accept it. They do not accept a waiver for states that don't meet that 95% participation in both buckets. So as we encroached on this number and are sitting right there at the cusp, it is anticipated that we will go over this year. With that in place, we wanted to do a little bit more of a deeper data dive into our state level data to really dig into that root cause analysis. And one of the things we wanted to look at, are we over 1% or getting close because of our assessment participation component, or are we truly identifying over 1% of our students in the state of Utah as having a significant cognitive disability? So one of the ways we can look at that enrollment side for Utah is through your UTREC submissions. And we have 3 times throughout the year that we do those student counts. We have that October submission, December 1 submission, and end of year counts. So you can see here what we did is we looked at over time by UTRECs, our percentage of students that were identified as having a significant cognitive disability, meaning that 1% alternate assessment flag is set in your SIS systems. So typically we have less students reporting back to the state in October and December than we do that year-end count, as being identified as having a significant cognitive disability and participating in alternate assessments. I think a component of that has to do with our DLM alternate assessment. We test in that spring window in March. So I think over the years, we've had a lot of districts that maybe just didn't set that 1% flag in those earlier submissions, as we weren't coming close into that assessment window. We're seeing a better increase of those numbers being set. We've got more LEAs that are engaging in our DLM alternate assessment benchmark windows that open up in the fall. So I think that is a component that lends to that increased identification. But you can see if we move forward in that trajectory that we've had, that we can anticipate we'll assess over 1% this year. So one of the components we looked at was math. We tend to some reason have a higher percentage of students participating in our math alternate assessments than we do ELA and science. So that's where we really focused that data dive. So you can see here the blue bars are, at the end of the day, our participation rates for alternate assessment. This blue bar here becomes our October 1 submission count. December is orange, and then green is that year end. So we have more students that we're identifying or we're indicating sending back to USBE as alternate assessment test takers in that year end count. So based upon projections, you can kind of see we were dipping, we hit those COVID years, sat a little stagnant, and then we've started increasing. So we can anticipate. This is just another way to look at this data. And thinking about how reliable is using these December counts and October counts to help predict whether or not we'll be over. You can see here that on that December 1 count, we typically have been trending higher. Everything seems to fall in line with that trend that we usually at the end of the year end up testing. There's a discrepancy of about 0.10 percentage difference in what we're submitting for that student count versus what we actually test. So you can see here, this is October counts. We, in October 1 data this year, have had, we've got a 0.92% difference in that identification. So it is anticipated that we will test over 1% of our students this year. We right now are seeing about 70% of our LEAs reporting students with a significant cognitive disability. And so we anticipate to see that go up with that year end count. And so that's really kind of where we're sitting. We are expecting to get flagged off of this year's assessment data. One of the other data components that we really dig into, and we've spent a lot of time with your special education directors as well as assessment directors. By the way, both groups have seen this exact presentation, is we really are digging into that students with disabilities, non-participation rates, and also wanting LEAs to really look at the students without disabilities and what's going on with participation. So you can see we have an impact at the state level here. This data set is just looking at our students with disabilities, that over 50% of our non-participants are parent opt-out. However, you do see that we do have a pretty high number of absent, and then just those unknown students. We don't know really why they didn't test. We don't have a participation code for them. We expected them to test, but they didn't test. We're, hovering between that 15 to 20%. So we are really encouraging our LEAs to be in a space where we've got this parent opt-out piece, but we have other non-participants in our districts that there's probably something we could do about. We tend to see a higher absent, just did not test in our grades 9 and 10, which is our Utah Aspire Plus assessment. We think a component to that is the way that that test is set up is to mimic very similar to what students will experience when sitting down and taking the ACT. So I don't know what your schools or districts have in place to catch those kiddos that just may not be there on the days that they have scheduled to do Utah Aspire Plus, or the student gets checked out of school in the middle of that testing. So that is one area that we really are encouraging our schools with grades 9 and 10 to look at for that absent piece, because that tends to sit really higher with that. Really looking at that opt-out component over time. So we do know we have that impact. So this is our opt-out percentage of non-participation from 22 to 24 by subject and special ed. So you can see that over time, in not only our students with disabilities, but also our general education, we are seeing an increase in parent opting out. We see it more happening here with our students with disabilities, in math for sure, but our gen ed is increasing also. So this is a trend that we're seeing across the state. I am in a space with special education directors where when participation data in assessment, by the way, not only impacts them in this 1% calculation, they're also held accountable for this through results-driven accountability. And we have a specific indicator around all of our assessment participation and proficiency. So this parent opt-out and our non-participants actually hits your special ed directors in a couple different avenues. So often we hear, well, we have this parent opt-out, there's nothing we can do about it. And I'm in a space, to be quite frank, where I feel like that is no longer an excuse that Utah can really afford to take on. We do hear every year where we have cases that come to us, sometimes through parents, where we've got teachers that are sending home parent opt-out forms saying your students are getting ready to take a test. It's really long. It takes a lot of time. Here's the parent opt-out form, highlighting, circling where they sign and cross that out. So we know that there are still practices and teachers and schools in Utah that are encouraging opt-out. And I think that that is a piece that is leading to this and a problem. In fact, we met with a district last week that they knew that there were rumblings that they had a principal at a school level that was encouraging opt-out, and it was the data that we brought forward to them that they needed to make some actionable changes. So to think that this is a parent right that is sitting on the parents' heads and there's just nothing we can do about it, there are some things happening in schools that are impacting this as well. We are also working very closely with special education directors. How do we use assessment data? I'm also working with teachers, special education teachers. How do we use this to help drive IEP decisions so that we have more value in our assessment data as a whole? So it's that system-wide top-down. When we have value, we're using assessment data to drive decisions and programming and curriculum and all of those things. Hopefully at the end of the day, everybody finds more value. So why this is so important is there are consequences for states if we do not meet this threshold or this cap. The way the federal government, the Department of Education, has put this out is kind of in a couple different buckets. If we are a state that was between 1 and 1.3% of that threshold, and we would have been eligible for a waiver but did not request one. In that first year, we get a notification letter sent to us. We're just kind of put on notice and we have to submit a plan. However, the way we read this is Utah does not meet this criteria. We don't assess 95% of our students. We would not be eligible to submit a waiver. Whether that means we would or not, I don't know. But I don't know if we really would align in that bucket of we're just going to be put on notice and send you a letter. From there, the next place that comes down is if we are a state between 1.0 and 1.3% of our students participating in alternate assessments, and we did not have a waiver and we were not eligible for a waiver, we could be in a space where they automatically just go ahead and put that grant award condition on our Title I grants. And part of that condition is then we're required to submit a plan. And they really are stringent in that. What are you going to do to become in compliance with that 1% cap? So that's why we really wanted to do that deep dive analysis into what's happening with assessment data versus enrollment. Would this be the bucket we land in? I don't know. We just may get a letter at the beginning. But in essence, we aren't eligible to apply for a waiver. They would not accept that. So the reason why that the consequences for this threshold or cap sits within this Title I world is because this is a regulation that sits within ESSA. It does not sit within IDEA, which is where our federal funding comes to support special education. It sits within ESSA, but crosses over into components of IDEA. So that's why the condition becomes part of the Title I grant. In that next year, if we are a state that had received a Title I grant condition in that next year, and we had not made progress in decreasing that alternate assessment participation rate or fell with under that threshold, they would now put that Title I grant award into a high risk status. This does sit on the administrative funds component of that Title I grant award. They have not yet withheld funding. They have threatened it with states. There are many other states that are over the threshold, have been from the beginning. There are a lot of states that have put some pretty stringent things in place to decrease those numbers. But Pennsylvania is actually a state that sits very similar to us, and they have a parent opt-out component, and they don't meet 95% participation of their students in their assessments. And so they've kind of leveled out. And it is anticipated that this could be the first year that we actually see some funding maybe being withheld. So OSEP, not OSEP, but the Department of Education, Office of Education are the ones that really oversee this, and they will go in and require certain things to happen within a state if they stay with over that 1% threshold. So once you get put into high risk status or you have administration funds withheld, and you don't decrease, you're still over, they will start looking at holding those fundings. So that's the space that we don't want to be. I don't think there's anybody in education that can agree that we have an excess amount of money and we have some to spare to just give back and not be able to use to support student outcomes. So those really are the consequences that really sit with this. So one of the things that we need to do is, one, we need to increase our assessment participation because that is just a problem in so many realms. But at the same time, we also have to keep a check on that 1% number and making sure that we're not over-identifying students across the state. So that's the work that the special education department takes on, is that sort of checking component and monitoring. So where we're at in our process right now this year is 1% participation threshold notification letters have gone out. Those went out in October to your special education directors. So those LEAs that were over have received that letter. And anyone that sat in that 0.85 to 0.99% of your students participating in alternate assessments have also received an email from me and have been invited to these 1% data dives. So we have been crossing the state. We started in November and we have 2 more left. Anyone that was over the 1% threshold were required to join us in one of these data dives. Those were in that 0.8 0.5% to 0.99 were invited, and some of them have joined us. And with that, Malia has helped provide a really robust set of data for those districts. And we've spent 3 hours with them walking through how to filter in Excel spreadsheets and given them some really specific actionable data points to look at, from what are your participation numbers look like, where are your students that are non-participants, looking at our students who tested last year. It's all student level data. How many of those students that took a DLM assessment that were previously on a regular assessment or previously had a classification change for their special education eligibility, or those students that took an alternate assessment and are receiving the least amount of services on an IEP. So we've really given your districts some actionable student level finite data to start digging through and looking at where they what they can do to ensure that they have the right students participating in alternate assessments. They also were given regular education assessment student data. So those have gone really well. We have been engaging in that. Those that were over 1%, those justification letters are due back to USBE on December 20th. And what we are asking them to do is really include that data for the root cause of why they're over. We do have a large number of charter schools or smaller LEAs that do get identified, and sometimes they have 1 or 2 kids that are testing, but because they have such a small overall student population, that it doesn't take many kids in that numerator to tip that 1% scale for them. And so that's fine. We look at that. We've had some of those guys show up and find some other anomalies in their data that they wanted to go dig into. But we do know that that is a component. And if that's really where we're at, that's okay. The law is also very clear that I cannot come to you as an LEA or to your special education directors and say you can't be over 1%. Because they are IEP team decisions. If you're over 1%, that is fine, as long as we have the right kids participating in those assessments. And that's where that monitoring piece really comes in. So we have been monitoring this. We choose a percentage of LEAs that are over 1% every year. And we go in and we pick out student files, and we actually dig into students' eligibility and IEPs and monitor that for compliance. If we feel like the IEP team was not justified, or they don't have the data present in those IEPs to defend why the student is taking alternate assessments, we will kick that back for IEP teams to go back and have other considerations, as well as other compliance things that we find. So we are monitoring this. One of the components that we added this year to beef this up was the data dives. So that's just, again, that sort of monitoring process. So we do identify non-compliance, and it does trigger findings for your districts. So we do engage in all of this. So as we talked about, we've got the data dives that have been happening. So here's just a little bit more information about that. We have had some LEAs to bring some files to review. And while we've engaged in that with some of your special education directors, they've pulled up some eligibility, and we've looked at cognitive scores and adaptive scores and all those testing components and had some really robust conversations. So I think it's been a really good thing. We have had some people ask us to provide them where we have the directive, I guess, to require these data dives. And this is just a reminder that ESSA is very clear that we as a state are required to provide oversight, and we determine that. So those data dives were a piece that we required this year. So you can see we've got 2 left. We were up in Ogden. We've been down to St. George. We were in Heber. And next we have Salt Lake and Nephi. And I have tried to be as accommodating as possible. We've got LEAs that are really far. So for example, Moab or Daggett, or those that are super far across the state, we are setting up some virtual links for those guys. So we are trying to be as accommodating as possible to get in attendance to this, because we do feel sorry, there's someone at the door. we do feel that digging into the data is really important. So you can see here are all of our districts and charters that were identified as over 1%. So this is the group of people that are expected to participate in those data dives, as well as submit a justification letter. So one thing that you can do to support this endeavor is, if you're on this list, reach out to your special education director. Ask them if they've attended one of these data dives, what their data looks like, how you can support them, because at the end of the day, the consequence comes down on Title I. And then here's a list, additional list of those that were over 1%. So we had about 50 LEAs across the state that were over 1%. And then we have the list of LEAs that were sitting in that 0.85 to 0.99. And we've had quite a few of these guys showed up to our data dives. So they are paying attention to this. They are concerned, and they really are looking, what is the information that they need to gather to help teams really make appropriate decisions for students. So in this slide, I just provide you links to different places where you can find more information on this. In case you're curious, we do post a lot of this on the special education assessment webpage, so you can find information there. And we are supposed to publicly be reporting our LEAs that are over 1%. So I need to get that file updated with this year's stuff. But we do report just either yes, you were over, or no, you were under. So we are cognizant of that student identifiable data. So with that, do you have any questions? So yeah, as a small charter, we're consistently over 1%, and many of these students transfer to the school from other schools. Yet they review their files and work hard to ensure we are justified with all our students. It can be tricky. And so at the end of the day, here's the deal. If they are truly students with significant cognitive disabilities, and that is the right placement, that is the right course of action for them, then that's great. Then that's where we want them, because we want them, you know, to have the best outcomes as possible. I have no problems pushing back, which we know pushing back to the federal government can only go so far, but I have no problem standing on that stage and still advocating, is this the correct threshold, that 1% place? But in order to do that, I have to be able to stand on this stage and truly, honestly, in my heart, say, and have the data to show that we do have the right students. We find every year that we have students that probably should not be on alternate assessments. It's getting better, but I do believe that there are still pockets and places and students that are on alternate assessments and receiving instruction in alternate standards that probably shouldn't be. So hopefully over time we can keep working on this and see where it goes. Will we have more information with the 2%, those who technically do not qualify, but there is not a discrepancy? Oh, so like they don't necessarily qualify for specific learning disability, Jody. That's a really
so I mean, like those students who are doing the best they can with what they have, so to speak. If they're referred to special education, but they're above that 70%, and then they're actually achieving around where their IQ is. The complication therein is, you know, I run the intervention team for the Title I services at our school, and I work very closely with special education. And so then you have these kids that are kind of in this gap, you know, because through elementary school, I think you can find that there's pretty strong Title I services being provided. I just feel like they kind of get lost when you start getting into middle school and high school. I'm just wondering, is there any more information coming about that?
Yeah, and I apologize for the dogs. The bug people are here, Max. I am so sorry. So they're going wild. I put them off for as long as I could. So I apologize. Yeah, I think there's some other things that we need to keep working on to support them instructionally. If students truly have a significant cognitive disability, you see that really come into play as you move across as you move, upgrade levels, right? The rigor of what's going on in our standards increases, and you can really see that. If you look at our alternate achievement standards and our core content standards at those lower grades in that K1, 2, they're very similar, right? Those are your basic entry skills. So a lot of what we do to support those kiddos in those really early grades is with support. So I think there's just continued work. That is a topic of conversation that sits with several groups that I participate nationally around all this work with assessments and standards with students with significant cognitive disabilities, as well as this whole thing. And there has been a lot of things around what can we do and what supports need to be in place for those that don't qualify in that sort of transition, right? Moving from that alternate to the gen ed. So I think the inclusionary practices, I think some of the stuff that Lindsay presented to you earlier is really good stuff and a piece to it. Really the key is we really need to find those gaps for those students. Where are they in that entry point to the standards, and really looking at what we're doing with that specially designed instruction for them to be, to make progress and achieve. So I think there's things that will continue to need to be developed and worked on in training and supporting those kiddos. We really talk about it being the whole child. So you have to have a cognitive and you have to have adaptive in place, and they have to have, that significant impact in comparison. But there's other things that come into play. And at the end of the day, Jody, we just really need IEP teams to be defensible in that. So it might not hurt to come to one of these data dives or reach out with your district. We can always come out and do specific technical assistance.
Yeah, I think they already did. I think you met Mandy Gillespie from our team from Venture, and they do
Yes.
they do a fabulous job. She's incredibly thorough, and they do a fabulous job. But I think it's more worrying what we're seeing is when kids transfer in middle school or high school, and they haven't probably had as many of the supports. We are very lucky that we have quite an extensive intervention team and special ed team in both our K-8 and our high school. But it's still quite tricky once they kind of hit the higher grades if they haven't had support. The ones that I've had since kinder, I mean, I can show RTI and MTSS data all the way through, but when they come new to the school, it becomes more challenging.
Yeah, it can be. And, every district, every charter is going to look different in
Sure.
the things that they're doing, right? When I was a junior high teacher, I can tell you, I saw it. There are some students where the system has created a significant cognitive disability. So I taught 7th, 8th, and 9th grade. These were my kiddos in the classroom. And we had a particular elementary school that put these kids on alternate assessments. And by the time I got them, it took years. It took 2 years really supporting, really working with resource teachers and gen ed teachers to get them out where they needed to be, because at the end of the day, we need to do right by kids for sure.
Okay, thank
So
you.
it does take a lot of supports.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome. And we are aware, we're working, we're building, learning progressions is a big thing that I think is missing with this. We do a really good job breaking out those skills and providing that learning progression in our alternate standards. And so I think that is an area that LEAs can work on, and that we in the state can support. And we've got, a bunch of stuff coming out of that PCBL world that I think can be supportive. So we will keep working on our end too. We do need to support those kiddos that truly don't qualify, but they're at that lower end of that moderate. And really, what are the accommodations and modifications and strategies that we have in place to support those kids to be successful?
Brilliant. Thank you.
You're welcome. And there's my contact. So please reach out if you have any questions. It sounds like, is the 1% calculated on total school population or special ed population? So it is actually calculated on your population of students that participate in our statewide assessments. And so we do have some places where their root cause is they have low participation. If all of their students enrolled in their school were participating, they wouldn't be over the 1%. So it's kind of a double-edged sword. So, you know, we need to make sure we're not over-identifying, but that participation in assessments is a very big component. So the way it's calculated is you take all of your students in your LEA that took a statewide assessment. So in grades 3 through 10, every single student that participated in RISE, Utah Aspire Plus, and DLM, your alternate assessment is in that denominator. And of all of those kiddos that participated in an assessment, received a valid score, how many of them were alternate assessment test takers? So that's how they produce that calculation. So we know that we do have an impact in our percentage due to non-participants. However, if we had every student in the state of Utah participating based on some of those October 1, December 1, and year-end counts, we would be over 1% anyway. But if we work to keep identifying kids appropriately and we work to increase our overall participation amongst gen ed students and students with disabilities in our general education assessment, also that helps that 1% number. So good questions. Okay, well, hopefully everybody will keep doing good work. Hopefully hitting this early and having people go back and teams looking at things. Hopefully next year we'll present to you and hopefully we'll be under 1% and not over. That's my goal, Max.
Tracy, thank you for your time and the updates to what's going on in Utah. And hopefully we avoid the consequences of impact to Title I funding with Utah, that we can skirt that issue or address that issue and be under that threshold so that we don't have to worry about that moving forward. But certainly thank you for updating us on this process and providing these details. I will get these slides from Tracy. We'll make them available for you if she is nice enough to share with me. And we will move on. And there's one other question there in the chat if you want to address that one. Or
yeah, so I did.
Okay,
Sorry,
thank you.
I've got dogs, so it's I'm so sorry, Max. I
And
apologize.
then Tracy, if I can get you to stop sharing.
Yeah, I can do that. So really what we need to do with those kiddos, we need to ensure all of our kids and especially our students with disabilities, that they're getting good core instruction, and with the correct supports and accommodations, but that they're actually getting instruction in ELA and math and science, and especially ELA and math, to our core standards. And so that's a big piece of it. And then what supports do we have in place? And back to those strategies. What are we doing for identifying strategies to support them, accommodations, you know, adaptations? So really working, I think, our special ed teachers as well as our general ed teachers together and what that looks like. And again, back to a lot of those inclusive practices from Lindsay's presentation, Max, I think are a good component with supporting those kids.
Thank you, Tracy. Keep us updated. We'll be in touch. Appreciate
Awesome. Thank you. Bye.
So last week, there were a number of you that received a letter from USBE, particularly from Marilee and Clint regarding maintenance of effort. And in that letter, it identified that you had been out of compliance in 1 or more years with maintenance of effort. There were a couple of instances where, based on the statutory compliance of this particular piece of the law, there would be a repayment of Title I funds. So Marilee and Clint and I wanted to take some time just to walk through some of these things. Some of the questions that we got back upon sending those letters out to some of those LEAs was specific about a couple of things. We wanted to address those right up front. So in a number of instances, we got the response that, but we made maintenance of effort with special education, which is a pretty stringent process to go through for that. Unfortunately, if you make MOE with special education, it doesn't necessarily mean you have made maintenance of effort with Title I. So the MOE for Title I is calculated slightly differently. Our team has been tasked to do some analysis on the processes and procedures that we have done in determining LEA's meeting maintenance of effort. So starting in FY25, so here we are. When an MOE for Title I or title programs that I'll show you on the next slide is calculated, any LEA that's not meeting maintenance of effort will be notified by a letter. So we've started, you'll get that letter, and only in the second year of failure to meet maintenance of effort in the preceding 5 years, and I'll walk through this in a separate slide, will there be any impact on your Title I funds moving forward or repayment of funds that you've already been allocated. So here are the titles that this applies to. Not only Title I Part A, but Part D, Title II, Title III, Title IV Part A, Title IV 21st Century Community Learning Centers, REAP programs, and Indian Education Title VI. So there's a list of them that this applies to, and this is a statutory requirement. So just as context, and I'm going to share the context, and then I'm going to turn the time over to Marilee to actually show you how the calculation works or how we look at those at the USBE. So as I said, it's a statutory requirement. What it's trying to do is ensure that you are not supplanting with Title I or titled funds under ESSA, that every school is receiving their fair share of state and local funds, and that federal funds are not coming in to take away those funds or to supplant those funds with titled funds. The requirement is you must spend at least 90% of your state and local funds that you spent the previous year in state and local funds for those schools that receive federal funds. Key points, the way they're calculated. It's one of two ways. It's either the combined per pupil expenditure or the aggregate expenditures that the LEA uses for. So the compliance is if you fail to meet the MOE requirement, your funds can be reduced. There's just a little note. The waiver we can get a waiver if you haven't met MOE so that it doesn't impact your funds, but it has to be a very significant change in something in your LEA. And that request has to be approved by the Department of Education. And just a little more detail about how maintenance of effort can be satisfied. So you're looking at the amount of expenditures over 2 years, taking 90% of that amount, and the results must, so these are your expenditures. Those results must be greater than or equal to the amount spent in the previous year for maintenance of effort to have been met in the current year, or it's the per pupil expenditure. Same process, same results. Now, there is a bit of flexibility written into the law, and the flexibility is that what we will look at is if the LEA fails to maintain or fails MOE in a given fiscal year and failed to maintain that, we'll take a look back in the previous 5 years. So if you miss it twice in 5 years, that's when your funding is impacted. So here's the example. So if we find that you have not met maintenance of effort in 2025, this year, we'll look back on the previous 5 years. If you failed in any of those 5 years, then it's potentially can impact your funds. I'm going to turn the time over to Marilee to share her screen and show you how we actually walk through that, or how we calculate it here at the state.
Okay. There was a question in the chat about the formula in Utah grants that was incorrect. The formula in Utah grant is the allocation and has absolutely nothing to do with maintenance of effort. Maintenance of effort looks at overall expenditures at the state level. So let me share my screen real quick here. Okay, so I know Val has some really good resources in the DMI, sorry, that calculate MOE, that can kind of give you ideas of how you can go in and calculate it. But this is something that you guys should be looking at on a yearly basis or throughout the year. But this is something that will usually the business administrators are the ones who will do this. I'm going to go to the instructions here. We're going to make this available to everybody. This is our actual calculation sheet that we use at USBE to calculate MOE. And if you go over here to the instructions real quick, it talks about some of the sections where they belong in the policies and regulations that go with it. But when we look at, we will start in January to do 25. So we use your ARP that are submitted at the end of, that was October and then are finalized at the end of December. We will use those figures that you report to calculate maintenance of effort. If we look at your general funds, overall expenditures and funds, these are the different funds they're using. That would probably not something that you might or might not know how that's dealt with and when it goes into the APR and how they're listed in your funds. But there are a few exclusions to the funds according to the regulations. But this is in the instructions that you can kind of go through. But we're just going to kind of walk you through a quick example here. So when I'm looking at MOE, we have expenditures, we look at 2 years. So our current year for 25 MOE will be your APR for FY24. So you're going almost 2 years back. We have to have a whole year's data of figures to be able to go and calculate it. So this would be for what will come up when we'll start doing it for 25. This will be FY24, and then the prior year would be FY23. So you report in your APR total expenditures, and you can have them in all of these categories. We just put them in one category, which was 10, which is just the general fund. So if we look at the LEA, it totals all of your expenditures for each of those accounts. And then it takes your federal revenue and totals everything that is federal revenue and then subtracts that out. So we get your total amount of state and local money that you spent at your LEA for the prior year. Okay, so then we do the exact same thing for the current year, which would be the one that's just reported on the APR. We'll look at total expenditures for all those accounts. It adds them up here. Total revenue, it adds them up here, subtracts one from the other and gives your total expenses less revenue. Okay, so the rule is, well, if you go here to test 1A, in your prior year, you only have to, this is where it's calculating 90% of what you spent in the prior year. So all it's taking is your prior year total expenditures less revenue times the 90%. And so if you look here, that means you have to spend $810,000 in this example. Your current expenses are $100,000, which means there's no reduction for test 1A. As we're going here, like Max said, there are 2 ways that it gives you a chance to pass this, and you have to fail both tests to fail MOE. So on this one, all it takes is it goes and looks at your October counts, your prior year student counts, and it then takes it and divides it by your total expenditures, again, the back that we used with all those accounts, and it's figuring out how much you're spending per student. It's doing the same thing here for current year. The total number of students, the percent, and then we're taking basically the threshold would be $102 that would have had to have been spent. And then you would have had to spend 121. So again, there's no reduction in this. So because you don't have a reduction in either, you don't have a reduction for that year at all. Okay, so we did a different test over here on test for LEAB here. We tried to keep the figures a lot the same, but just showed they had a lot more federal revenue in the second year than they had the first year. So when you come over here to your calculation in 1B, they needed to spend $810,000. That was the 90% threshold, and they only spent 800,000 total expenditures. So that means they missed maintenance of effort. But it still goes in and looks at it according to your student counts, and it looks at the test for the prior year, for the current year. And again, it's the 90% threshold would have been 810, and it was only spent $667 there per student. So in that case, there's the reduction here in test 1A, the reduction here in test 1B. So there will be a reduction. It means that the LEA did not meet MOE for this year. Now I know that's a lot of figures to go through, but it kind of, I've looked at the one in the DMI, and Val has done a really good job on that one. And it might be easier for you to understand and to get through it. The Title I handbook also has some good resources and kind of explains it out there a little bit, but we wanted to make what we're using available. And if it helps, and when you're filling, if you want to see what figures it ties back to, we have went into look at a few people's that failed MOE that we're notifying, and it's if they're not reporting right to the APR, if somehow something isn't being like directed up when it goes into the federal or into the state system to report for the APR, it will stop it from, sometimes the figures that the directors have aren't the same as what's being put into the system, what we're using. So that's where a good communication between our directors and our business administrators are important, to know where you're at. And that's where we need you guys. That's one of the things we're looking for in our Title I monitoring, is just making sure that you guys are calculating MOE and you're looking at it periodically to know, okay, we're on par for spending what we should be to not have reductions coming. Too much information? Yes. What questions can I answer here for you? I'm trying to get
So
back to
this
the-
is Brett at Ames. If that's all calculated at the state level, my question is, when I go into Utah grants and I do the MOE calculation, I'm not doing any calculation. It's already in there, right?
You're talking in your application in Utah grants?
Yep. In the MOE section.
Val, do you want to help me out here?
Is there I don't know that there is an MOE section in the application.
There's an MOE form that you have to do to get through the Utah grants, but you can't change anything on it.
I
And
think
the
there
MOE
is in
is
the
already
desk
set in there.
monitoring instrument, but
No, that's just an assurance in the DMI. So, Brett, if you could locate what you're talking about, because none of us have seen that.
And it could be
Utah
once
grants
again something for
attachments.
SPED.
There's an MOE form that you have to complete.
There is for SPED that they have different qualifications and different exceptions they can use. They don't look at total overall expenditures like we do in title. So I'm not sure if maybe you're confusing the two, but I don't know of anything in the title side of it that
So this
is required anywhere.
This is the IDA flow through that includes
Okay.
the MOE.
And yes, so like that first slide came out, there is a total different between SPED MOE and the calculation for ESEA title MOE. So this is a totally separate process that we're doing here that doesn't have anything to do with the SPED process. That answer the question then?
No, it
Does that
doesn't,
help?
but that's okay. I'll ask it in a different way at a different forum.
The IDEA MOE has to do with special education. And so they're calculated differently than for Title I. And so that form that you're filling out has nothing to do with the title MOE that we're doing here.
I got that, but then we also got a letter that we didn't make MOE, and yet by all our calculations we had, including the DMI. And then when I went into my IDEA, it was showing that I had not met MOE. Just trying to figure out the relationship between the two, and where do I go with my business administrator to make sure that the numbers that I think is correct are correct with him and correct with the state. That's what I'm trying to figure out.
Yeah, thanks, Brett. We can certainly, set up some time with you to take a look at it and try to weed through that. But I certainly appreciate the notification. What other questions do you have for Marilee, Clint, and I regarding maintenance of effort? And what the heck, I'll just throw Val in for the fun of it.
I did my job. Take a look in the resources tab in the DMI, and I think the calculations that Marilee went through, there's a different way to configure those, maybe to view those, and to put both the example of the spreadsheet that Marilee and Clint developed, as well as just the PDF that I came up with. I think that will help you to have some different perspectives.
Yes, Val's isn't quite as number oriented. That kind of confuses you than that. Like ours is a little more detailed in what it's. Hers is a lot easier to follow for most people.
Thanks, Marilee. So anytime that we conduct a monitoring visit, a fiscal monitoring is a part of that, and the maintenance of effort is a piece that gets looked at pretty carefully. So, we'll have some office hours after this particular meeting, and if you have specific questions about it, please stay and ask those questions, and we'll try to provide accurate answers. Thank you, Marilee. Thanks, Clint. Thanks, Val. Moving on with the agenda, this is a piece that I'm pretty excited about. On our team, on our ERSI team here at the state, we have Savannah Hunt, who works specifically with out-of-school time programming, and particularly the 21st Century Community Learning Centers. And she has a really cool tool that she would like to share with you. And I just have to add on, because I have the microphone, my dissertation is about collaboration, coordination, and alignment between regular school day academic activities and out-of-school time academic activities, and how they really can benefit each other. So, Savannah, thank you. And I also have to thank you. I asked Savannah to be willing to bounce around in the agenda because we had some pretty tight scheduling, and she was right there available. So thanks, Savannah.
Thank you. I appreciate you always letting me take some time in this meeting. I'll just quickly share some resources with you. Like Max said, I run our Title 4B 21st century funding. So I work with all things out of school time. So that includes after school, summer programming. Sometimes people use funding to run Friday if they only have school Monday through Thursday. I know there's just a couple districts who do that. But I wanted to show you some resources from the Utah After School Network. They are one of our contracted TA providers for 21st century grantees. They also work with a lot of other after school programs across the state with other funding. So this is just their website. It's utahafterschool.org. You're welcome to go see what resources are available here. One I wanted to show you is the Find a Program map. So if you click on this map, this is every single after school program across our state that works with UAN. So this is not even an exhaustive list of every program across the state. And when we talk about OST programming, there are 3 different formats it frequently comes in. One would be an LEA is running their own program at their own school site. The second would be an LEA is partnering with a community-based organization such as Boys and Girls Club, YMCA, Youth Impact, organizations such as that, to run an after-school program at their school site. So it would be your LEA students at the school site, but maybe the staff and some of the supplies are being funded by Boys and Girls Clubs, for example. And then the third one would be an out of school time program that, oh, I'm sorry, there's another meeting happening right in the room next to me. So you might have heard some wooing and things going on. They're having a very interactive activity going on. But the third one would be a community-based organization that runs their own program at their own site. Maybe they have their own building, something like that. So as we go through and talk about after school and school day alignment, I would encourage you to think about, do I know if any of my school sites in my district or at my charter have their own after school program? Do we as an LEA hold our own programming? If you don't, do you know of any partnerships that are going on? I once went to do a site visit at a school. I walked into the office, talked to the school secretary and said, "Hi, I'm from the state board. I'm here to visit the after school program." And she said, "We don't have an after school program." I was like, "Well, the paperwork says there's an after school program here on my grant." And she went, oh, you're talking about the YMCA. They're in some, I think they might be in the cafeteria or something. So if that's a situation that you're in, maybe be thinking through, do our school administrators, our school secretaries, our teachers, do they know what programming is going on? Because it's their students and their building. They should really know what programming is going on with their students and their building and be aware of it. And then even if it is a community-based organization in your school boundaries, maybe, take a look at this program map and see if there's any in your school boundaries that you don't know of that you can create some partnerships with. Many of them would be happy to work with you and coordinate where it's applicable. And then the other specific tools, so you can also go to program resources. So there's a start and after school program page. So if your LEA does not have an after school program and you're interested in starting one, we've talked about a lot of different forms of inclusion and alignment. I don't want to add anything to anyone's plate thinking through, well, we need a plan for this and we need a plan for this and we need this program. Like a lot of my colleagues have discussed today, how can we include all of these programs kind of in the same plan? After school, as Max has talked about with his dissertation, after school programs, when run in a quality and effective manner, can have a great impact on disabled students and students with special needs and be a great way to collaborate and serve all those students. So feel free to take a look at that. And then the last thing I wanted to point out is the school day after school alignment rubric. This is a tool that the Utah After School Network has produced just to help give a guideline of what really is quality alignment. I frequently hear the school principals or people say, yes, we love the after school program. The after school program's great. I fully support the after school program. And then we go through and do this alignment rubric with them, and they realize they're not aligned as well as they could be because they just didn't really think about what the options were in terms of aligning. So this is a tool that anyone could fill out and to measure if you are fully integrated, coordinated, associated, or fully self-contained. And there are several sections. So we have relationships, and it's just a simple rubric. So you would go through and for this indicator communication, read each of the possible options, and then you can just check the box saying which option you think applies to your situation, and then total those at the end. And then at the end of each section, there's some space for reflection. So what were your responses? What are some goals you can set to increase that after school day alignment? So we have relationships. How do you communicate? Do you, if a school day teacher is noticing a particular student is having some struggles, are they able to send an email to the after school team and let them know, hey, here's how, I think you could maybe help this student, or here's just so you know, this student's struggling with XYZ thing. And obviously when we differ with, a after school program that is run by the school versus a CBO, there obviously is some hesitancy with data sharing, and that can, we can get data sharing agreements set forth, but we can also kind of take that as somewhat of a case by case basis, what information is appropriate to share. So policies, are you aware of what the grant funding requirements are possibly? Program and school teams regularly discuss student attendance. So are the after school team being included in some of these policy decisions, or is it even kind of a thought going on when we think about policy? And then shared resources, such as rooms and spaces. I once ran an after school program where every time it was parent teacher conferences that week, they needed to use the library to hold the book fair, and they needed the cafeteria for some other things. So my after school program got sent into the hallway, and we were running homework help. We were doing our activities on the floor in the hallway for the week during that time. So are we able to make some space for this programming that is beneficial for students? And then student needs are, like I said earlier, are we sharing concerns? Are school day and district employees thinking about, which students would benefit from being in the after school program, and suggesting, can we talk to a parent, get them a registration form, see what their needs may be? And then academics. So curriculum resources, are you making sure the after school program knows what curriculum you use? Are they aware of what types of things are going on during the school day? And then communication about that academic progress. Do you have data sharing agreements? Do you talk to each other about how to impact that data? So this is just a tool to like I said, kind of see where you're at. And if you do not have an after school program, think about if there's any way an out of school time program could support your students. Title I funds, Max, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe Title I funds can be used for out of school time programming. Trust lands funds can be used for out of school time programming. At-risk WPU can be used for out of school time programming. So even though I run the 21st Century Grant, that's not the only funding available to be used for out of school time.
If it's identified in a need in your needs assessment and is part of your plan, you can spend Title I funds for that. Questions for Savannah? I thought I heard somebody. Thank you, Savannah. Really appreciate that resource. If you have questions about that particular resource or need guidance, Savannah is always available and willing to help. So appreciate it. Are there any questions for anything that you've heard today that I can jot down, note down, that would be beneficial for all to hear? Okay, just a notification, the 2025 National ESEA Conference held in Austin, Texas this year is February 19th through the 21st. In the meeting notification reminder and in the agenda, there is a link to that, the ESEA network, where you can get information about that conference if you're interested in going to that. Our next meeting is March 27th. We'll send out notifications and reminders as we get closer. As always, should you have questions or concerns, please reach out to our team. We would love to talk to you. Sometimes feels like we don't get enough time to talk to you. And then as a notification, 50% of you have not yet submitted the DMI, and it's due next week. Val has sent out a message to some of you, but if you know you haven't completed that, please take time and complete that DMI. Thanks, Val. Okay, so this is the end of our November Title I Directors Meeting. Those of us on the USBE team that can stay after will stay after. If you have questions that are specific to your LEA that you would like to address and speak with us about, please hang on afterwards. If not, I want to tell you during this busy time of year and on a Tuesday, a snowy Tuesday, how much we appreciate you being here and spending time with us. It's always appreciated when we get to see you or we get to spend time with you. So thank you. And until next time, we'll see you. Thanks, everybody.